start. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 23rd Annual PA-AMR Conference. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Pennsylvania DEP, the Pennsylvania Environmental Digest, Foundation for Pennsylvania Watersheds, Appalachian Region Independent Power Producers Association, also known as ARIPA, PA Aggregates and Concrete Association, and Pagnotti Enterprises. We ask that questions be asked through the Whova Q&A and the chat box to the right of the video on the web app and below on a mobile app. Please do not chat in the Zoom player. Our session will conclude in approximately 40 minutes. And again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'd like to introduce the following presentation from Joshua Glace and Dr. Jennifer Demchak. Joshua has over 10 years of experience completing and overseeing environmental projects across Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, and West Virginia. He has managed the Agricultural Planning Reimbursement Program for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Chesapeake Bay office since 2017. His experience includes environmental project management, regulatory agency coordination, agricultural planning, spatial data collection and analysis, GIS mapping and data management, stream assessment and design, wetland delineations and reporting, environmental assessments, ecological studies, watershed assessment and monitoring, water quality assessment, wetland mitigation and monitoring, and habitat restoration plans. Prior to joining LDG, Josh worked at the USDA Agricultural Research Service, where he assisted in watershed monitoring, data collection, stream sampling, and nutrient movement and reduction experiments, specifically phosphorus within small agricultural watersheds. Jennifer's impressive experience in watershed planning, nutrient removal, and AMD treatment system design and implementation, in conjunction with her extensive professional network and subject knowledge, make her a foremost expert within her field. Her experience includes performing watershed assessments, developing restoration plans, designing and installing pollution mitigation systems for mine drainage and agricultural, and writing grants to secure funding for the implementation of projects. She also has a strong background in preparing state and federal permits. And with that, we can get the presentation started.
Hey, Jen, your video or your audio is working. Can you unmute and just say hi?
Hi,
Perfect.
everybody.
Okay.
I'm here, and yes, I know this is a little strange since I am here, but Josh had to be at a mandatory field meeting today. So I can answer questions and along the way, but we did have to tape it ahead of time, but I am here for questions.
Sounds good. All right, I'll get it going.
All right.
2021 AMR Conference.
Oops.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 AMR Conference. I'm Josh Glace, Associate Project Manager with Larson Design Group, along with Dr. Jennifer Demchak of Mansfield University and Water LLC. We're here to discuss countywide action plans for clean water and their importance to the overall quality of the local communities and how A&B ties into these crucial water quality plans. What are countywide action plans, or CAPs as we call them? These plans were outlined in the Phase 3 Watershed Implementation Plan by DEP to help improve the overall health of the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania, along with other Bay states, are working to clean up the nutrients and sediments going into the Chesapeake Bay at a rapid rate. DEP determined that these county-specific plans would help improve local water quality and continue to support efforts that local agencies and partners are currently doing in these counties. This overall plan will help look at stakeholders, community members, and other agencies to develop a realistic and beneficial plan going forward. During the CAP development process, a steering committee was established to oversee the entire development process. Steering committee consisted of county commissioners, conservation district staff, county planning staff, and other local stakeholders that had a vested interest in the plan. This steering committee was the general oversight of the whole process. There's also a CAP coordinator, which was either a consultant, such as myself, or an individual hired to oversee this process by the county. The steering committee then solicited input from local stakeholders. These stakeholders included landowners, farmers, watershed groups, other agencies, or anybody that had a vested interest in improving overall water quality and reducing nutrients and sediment going into the Chesapeake Bay. At the beginning of each CAP development process, the counties were given a toolbox highlighting the reduction load targets for nitrogen and phosphorus. These toolboxes also highlighted specific watersheds where these nutrient reductions could be taking place, sectors where the county can get the most bang for their buck, and how the loading within the county is broken down. These toolboxes were evaluated by both the steering committee and stakeholders and determined which practices, projects, or areas the counties want to target within their CAP development process. Some of the counties also added additional sectors where they thought they would get better nutrient and sediment reduction based on their boots on the ground experiences. These additional sectors included the natural sector, watershed health, and forested as additional categories in the CAP. For today's presentations on the CAP, we're going to focus on Tioga, Luzerne, and Lackawanna counties. These three counties were very unique as all three of them have AMD located within their borders. This is something a little bit different that DEP did not experience within the CAP development process in their Tier 1 and 2 counties, and only a few of their Tier 3 and 4 counties have AMD. This was an additional sector that we determined would generate great nutrient reduction and overall watershed health within each county. First county we'll break down is Tioga County. The breakdown within the toolbox of the nutrients coming from the county are as follows. Agriculture clearly is number one at 51% of the nutrients coming from that sector. The natural sector was a close number 2. The natural sector is made up of natural lands that nutrients naturally come off of. Tioga County has an extensive amount of public ground, both state forests and state game lands, and is heavily forested. Stormwater and wastewater are generally very small within this area. However, there's plenty of opportunities to benefit from the CAP in both of these sectors. Some of the findings we found throughout the development process are increased amounts of flooding. Tioga County has seen a large quantity of flooding going on in the past few years due to increased rainfalls and frequency of events. The county commissioners and the steering committee identified this very early on as one of the major takeaways from the CAP. Transition of ag lands. They're seeing the transition from not only different ag types and ag farm types, potentially from dairy to beef or dairy to crop farming, but also the retirement of land. More farms are turning into recreational properties. So we want to see this transition of these ag lands going from actively producing farm fields to potentially reforested and returning to a more natural state. We're also seeing a large amount of existing BMPs on forested and ag lands. These BMPs have been taking place for many, many years and aren't always captured within the model that determines the nutrient reductions for each county. This is something that we determined that needs to be captured and categorized so that Tioga County is getting the proper credit needed. The opportunities for success in Tioga County were highlighted throughout the stakeholder and steering committee meetings. Obviously, farming was a clear first choice, so we looked at obviously increasing no-till planting, protecting those fields that are along streams to improve overall water quality. Liming application. So by liming and raising the pH of the soil, we can bind phosphorus to the soil to reduce the overall runoff going into the local streams and waterways. Manure analysis, not only manure analysis, but soil sampling and agronomic recommendations, so farmers can make better informed management decisions on their operations, so there's not the over application of nutrients going onto the lands and then potentially running off into our waterways. Something that Tioga County had a big interest in is stormwater management of existing and outdated BMPs. This is looking at reducing impervious cover, retrofitting existing stormwater basins, and protecting these areas where flooding is occurring mostly in and around, urban settings. By reducing the amount of stormwater coming off these paved areas, we can reduce the amount of floodwaters that are going downstream. And then obviously mitigation of flooding by reconnecting streams and wetlands and floodplains within their in-stream structures. Some of the challenges of the implementation of the CAP plan within Tioga County are as follows. The shortage of staffing for the conservation district. There's only so many people that can help implement these projects, design and oversee projects, and also do the education and outreach needed to get some of these projects off the ground. So we're seeing smaller staff, especially in some of the smaller conservation district counties throughout the Chesapeake Bay. Financing for the implementation plan. To get these projects and the nutrient reductions off the ground, there's going to take a lot of funding to get some of these larger projects moving. Some of these projects are in excess of several $100,000, taking a substantial amount of design and implementation. Receiving credit for existing BMPs on ag and forest land. A lot of great work has been done over the last several years that isn't necessarily captured within the current Bay model. The Bay model is a model that EPA is using and the Bay states have agreed upon how to capture the best, how much nutrients are actually going to the Chesapeake Bay. This is a land use based model, and the data is currently being updated on every 2 years. However, one of the missing data sets that we're seeing is projects that have been implemented in the last 5 to 10 years that they're not being counted as accurately as they could be. So we need to be capturing those BMPs, getting those into the models such as Practice Keep or Field Doc, so that the Bay model is, so the counties are getting the accurate nutrient reductions they need. Next is just overcoming the apathy within the community and in these counties. There are individuals that are very interested in this process, but some have lack of interest or enthusiasm into developing these projects. It takes a tremendous amount of outreach and education to people to begin to develop these relationships and get projects off the ground. Next county is Lackawanna County. Their breakdown is slightly different than Tioga's, as it has a very small portion of agriculture, but stormwater and wastewater are very high. Obviously, Lackawanna is a more developed county and has a completely different demographic and land use types. Key findings that we found is increased reporting of activities that have currently been ongoing, importance of stormwater management practices such as stream retrofits and stream bank stabilization, reducing sediments going into our local waterways, the need to properly store, mitigate stormwater to assist in flood control, agricultural preservation, preserving the agricultural lands that are in the county so that they stay lands and they're agricultural lands and they're better managed. And then obviously the AMD and AML, both operation and maintenance of existing facilities, new facilities, and continuing the co-treatment of phosphorus. The opportunities for success identified in Lackawanna County are very different from Tioga County. So one of the major differences is Lackawanna County has MS4 communities, which have ongoing sediment reduction goals and mandates that are set for these. I believe there's 28 municipalities within Lackawanna County that are designated as an MS4. So partnering with these municipalities on their stormwater management and their MS4s and capturing their pollution reduction plans or PRPs is very important to achieve these goals. Next, obviously AMD and AML, obviously continuing with the operation and maintenance of existing facilities, new facilities, and the co-treatment of phosphorus. There has been research already, including that these AMD treatment facilities are removing phosphorus as a secondary effect that hasn't been looked at before. So we want to continue looking at those and developing how we can benefit both AMD and AML lands with the countywide action plans. And then another huge component that we've identified actually throughout all counties is establishing the educational programs and engagement to these local community partners, residents, landowners, just to increase the awareness of the watershed health. As we've been talking to people, stakeholders, different entities within the county, just being able to educate these people on the importance of the water quality and its long-term success for future generations has been very clear. Obviously, the challenges of the implementation here for Lackawanna County with the MS4s is MS4s are concentrated more on sediment reductions, and the CAPS are tied more towards nitrogen and phosphorus reductions. So tying these two projects together, because a lot of the times we're seeing the benefits from one project has secondary benefits for the other. So if a sediment reduction project can also tie together to nutrient reduction. So we want to be looking at these projects, how we can be benefiting on both sides of the aisle there. So understanding that these projects, as they're doing stormwater basin retrofit, stream restoration projects, stream bank stabilizations, how can we add that nutrient reduction component that's already happening, but also increasing that? So on stream restoration, looking at more riparian buffers, floodplain reconnections, additional nutrient attenuation around these streams. The nutrients that are in these stormwater basins have a certain amount of nutrient loading that they're reducing by keeping those basins cleaned out and treating those stormwaters at a higher level. Obviously, the identification of small agricultural community here in Lackawanna County, we've seen that, preserving those acreages, having the proper amount of soil health and farming initiatives and BMPs, the county is currently doing a great job with that. They're visiting their farms. They have a lot of good work going towards that. So obviously continuing that, but that's a smaller component versus the stormwater and wastewater in Lackawanna County. Lastly, we have Luzerne County. The breakdown is very similar to Lackawanna County. We're seeing a slightly larger agricultural breakdown. Obviously, stormwater and wastewater are right there together. We're seeing obviously an emphasis on providing technical assistance and encouraging voluntary compliance to address these environmental concerns, these nutrient reductions that are ongoing. Education and outreach is very big in Luzerne County. We want to tie together what existing partners are doing, how they're working together, and moving forward. We also have obviously the AMD and AML, very similar to Luzerne or Lackawanna County here in Luzerne County. So we want to continue, understanding how those existing facilities, new facilities, what projects need to continue ongoing. The opportunities for success, obviously the AMD coordination with stakeholder groups and BAMR, looking at that low-hanging fruit. We know there's water quality issues. We know what needs to be done. How can we continue to support those efforts? Continuing and initiating the soil health initiatives. Luzerne County has soil health initiatives ongoing with their farmers, so we want to continue to support those, not only by soil sampling, manure analysis, agronomic assistance, no-till farming, things of that nature. Collaborating with DAMA and WVSA on the collection of their stormwater data. So obviously, Luzerne County is very similar to Lackawanna. They have 32 MS4s within their county. WVSA administers a fair amount of those. So capturing that information and continue to build upon that. Education outreach on on-lot septic systems, maintenance and upgrades. Basically educating people that have on-lot septic systems, how they need to be maintained so they can continue functioning and have longevity, and they're functioning as intended. A lot of people don't always know what it's like to own an on-lot septic system, what the maintenance is required, and how it needs to be done. So educating those people and showing them the proper maintenance procedures on those systems. They want to continue to provide technical support for all their landowners, farmers, municipalities. They're a great technical resource, and that's the goal of the county. And then also obviously continue the reporting and verification of existing and new BMPs, similar to Tioga County. A lot of work has been done, has been put on the ground that might not be captured and be entered into the existing Bay model. And then lastly, obviously reporting those existing BMPs. A lot has been done. There's a lot of great work that has been done and is ongoing in the county, and they want to make sure they're getting the proper credit going forward. The challenges, as you can see for most of them, is obviously funding and the resources for the implementation. There's a lot of high dollar projects, a lot of effort, a lot of work that can be done. how it can be done, getting that funding in place, getting those projects in the ground is a huge component of this. Lack of the BMP verification process. Some of these BMPs haven't been captured, so capturing them, re-verifying them, making sure the county's getting the credit for the BMPs that are in the ground going forward. Attaining a high match for some of these high-cost grant proposals and projects. When you see some of these grants that we're going to be pursuing to get the funding for these projects, they have a high match, and it's not always attainable by the landowners, by the conservation district, by even some of your larger municipalities. It makes it very hard to get this work off the ground. So we want to try to change that a little bit through some of our programmatic recommendations within our CAP. Make those recommendations, make them more attainable. The time frame, obviously, the CAP process, I believe initial discussion started in 2017. We're in 2021. The reduction goals for the Bay are by the end of 2025. So we have a very small window to do a lot of work and hit those reduction goals and continue to move forward. And then also the technical resources that are available. Obviously, the county has access to some engineering, the technical resources within their staff, but getting the design, getting permits in place, implementations, reporting, that's a very hectic component of this. So making sure that's in place. And obviously there's 34 other counties that are in the process of doing the same thing that Tioga, Lackawanna, and Luzerne are doing. So, making sure those resources are spread out and they're out there for these counties as they develop. And lastly, which is probably the most important, I know here in Luzerne County, is education and outreach, to whether it be to young people, to landowners, farmers, municipalities, elected officials, getting that education and outreach so that people understand the importance of overall water quality and how it compares to what's ongoing, and tying these CAPs together with not only water quality and nutrient reduction, sediment reduction, but then tying into our A&D and AML goals as well.
Okay, hi. As Josh has already talked a little bit about both abandoned mine drainage and abandoned mine land, were both highlighted in the Tioga, Luzerne, and Lackawanna CAPs as having negative impact on the watershed health. So that's something that we wanted to focus on, and is a little bit unique in these particular counties in the development. So just to take a second, I know most of us here know what AML and AMD is, but just so we're all on the same page, and some of this I had taken from the EPCAMR website, but AML is, we have about 280,000 acres here in Pennsylvania, and we know that it changes the ecological balance within the environment, especially water quality, as that sediment runs off and precipitates in our stream. It changes the water quality, either alkaline or acidity. It creates both health and safety hazards in our environments, and it's many different things depending on where we're at. It could be high walls, it could be water-filled pits, it might be, some people call them spoil piles, refuse piles, calm piles. It kind of just depends where you're at in the state. And I'm personally from Clearfield County, which has the most acreage of abandoned mine lands anywhere in the state. So I'm very familiar with abandoned mine lands. And on the other side of the coin is abandoned mine drainage. And it degrades both the habitat and water quality as that iron's precipitating. It's smothering out any aquatic life that might be able to live in those streams, and makes it also unfit for use. It clogs our pipes, it coats the inside of the pipes for industrial use, even for animal use. No one wants to kayak. Every year they have the Red Meshannon race, but still we don't want to stain our kayaks red. Water can either be acidic, so if it's less than 7, we call it acid mine drainage, or if it's alkaline greater than 7, maybe it's called alkaline mine drainage. And we know that it contains metals, things like iron, aluminum is leached from the surrounding overburden and soil, manganese, and high sulfate levels. So these are things we're pretty familiar with, but DEP and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation weren't that familiar in dealing with them, in part with the CAP development. So that was something new. And these are the typical pictures that we see, right? We have the deep mine discharges creating the big impoundments. You know, here's a cut that's filled with water. Maybe there's a borehole. The seepage, the river is running right on the edge of the streams and things. So, you know, these pictures are all through Pennsylvania, very common in Tioga, Luzerne, and Lackawanna counties. So, as we identified action items through these 3 counties, they were pretty consistent among the stakeholder groups. The first being, we want to restore these abandoned mine lands. You know, we want to make sure that first they're safe, so there's that human health component, and second, the environmental health. We want to make sure that they are, you know, regraded, they're replanted, that they're just safe, so that there's no longer humans can get hurt, and that there's no longer degradation occurring to the aquatic or water quality life anymore. We want to enhance existing and future AML reclamation. So maybe it's no longer just, okay, let's regrade that, seed and plant it. How can we be creative, right? And you're going to see that in the next slide too. We want to be creative about it, right? What have we done in the past, and how can we build upon that? You know, we have some great project partners sitting around the table, and we want to bring more into the fold. So, you know, how can we make additional conservation benefits? So instead of just reclaiming, maybe we can make black duck habitat. Maybe we can, you know, instead of just planting with locusts and pine trees, maybe we can make some type of silviculture. Let's, instead of just putting white pine, could we do some other type of conifer that could be a Christmas tree farm? So how can we be creative about our reclamation work? And then really treating the mine drainage discharges to restore water quality, right? Yes, we're doing this throughout the counties, throughout Pennsylvania, but really thinking about prioritization, thinking about watershed health, thinking about the unique and creative ways that there are and that exist to treat them. And that's something I want to talk about in the next couple of slides. So one of the unique things that were done as part of this CAP process was project partners, with AMR taking the lead, actually sampled 20 sites in Luzerne County and 14 sites in Lackawanna County to determine if a relationship could be found or seen between nutrient and mine drainage. And what this would allow would be for mine drainage to tap into some of the nutrient funding that is coming down the pipeline to be able to meet the Chesapeake Bay goals of 2025. So AMR sampled the 20 sites in Luzerne, 14 sites in Lackawanna, and measured flow where they were able, estimated some, and then collected field measurements of pH, iron, aluminum, nitrate, nitrogen, and phosphate. And what the results showed were that the nitrate nitrogen at all sites were less than 1 milligram per liter. So not necessarily significant in that, you know, drinking water standards are less than 10 milligrams per liter or less than 45, kind of depending on how you look at it and what you want to compare against. But, you know, you could argue that, well, nitrate might go off quickly as nitrogen gas, or, you know, get bound back to the soil, or you have denitrifying bacteria and lots of processes are going on. But but really the less than 1 is not overly significant. What maybe was more significant was that the phosphate levels kind of ranged between 0 and 13, 14 milligrams in both of the counties. So there was more phosphate that could be seen in the streams. And, you know, this could be argued that the phosphate cycle starts with rocks, bedrock, and, you know, as it's cycling, it goes from the bedrock to the soil and is taken up by plants and eaten by animals, and then as they decompose, it goes back. But what throws that phosphate cycle off is if we put excess nitrogen, sewage, other man-made pollution into it. But if we have a lot of erosion, if going into the water, we might be seeing excess phosphorus. So it would kind of be interesting to do a little more investigation into this, that, you know, is it from mine drainage? Is it from erosion? So we're seeing it from the soil, or exactly where that's coming from. But, you know, we are seeing phosphate. We just need to kind of figure out exactly, you know, where that is coming from. But it leads us to maybe some further investigation, some further testing at sites, maybe in Tioga County, you know, and then in Luzerne and Lackawanna. And it also leads to that we need to basically be extremely creative in these particular counties as we move forward in aiming for overall watershed health. That it's not just agriculture, it's not just stormwater, it's just not, you know, upgrading our sewage treatment systems. That it's really, we do need to look at mine drainage, and we need to realize that it's overall watershed health. So some areas that we could focus on is the use of biosolids. So from an abandoned mine land perspective, we know that there's spoil piles, and we still know that there's high walls, and we know that there's areas that need cleaned up in these different counties. And we know that biosolids are a wonderful soil amendment. So, you know, if we could have those relationships back with the different organizations and use those biosolids as our soil amendment. We could also really focus on growing carbon sequestering plants as we do these reclamation projects, and think of maybe some carbon credits, and think of carbon dioxide removal, and kind of tie those things together, I think is going to be really important. Also, there's the RIPA and the forest reclamation techniques. So that's also important for stormwater management. Instead of, you know, running equipment over and over and doing compaction when we do reclamation, you know, leave it much more ragged in the grading techniques, and leave it rough and ready. Basically, it creates habitat, and think about what plants and trees that we're growing there, and it's overall much better. So this ties together both reclamation and our stormwater management in these counties. And then kind of the two even more creative, more interesting, that ties back with, are there phosphates related to the mine drainage, is these last two bullet points here. And that is using co-treatment of sewage with mine drainage. So what you know about mine drainage is that we basically use two components, right? We use organic matter and we use limestone to raise the pH, and then we precipitate out the metals. So one thought process is that instead of using mushroom compost, horse manure, hay, wood chips as our organic matter, we could use sewage, right? So if we co-treated sewage and mine drainage together, then we have these two waste products, and the sewage is acting as our organic matter component, And because of chemistry and kinetics, the sewage, as it allows the iron hydroxide to precipitate, the iron hydroxide will co-precipitate the phosphate. So that will then basically encourage precipitation of the phosphate and the mine drainage, and you don't have to add additional alum or other flocculating agents. So you're saving both sewage treatment costs and saving mine drainage costs, and you're treating these two waste products. So that's something we are doing some conversations with other consultants and doing some paper literature review research that this, was discussed back in the late 2000s, but it never really took off. So we want to make sure that, we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's before we, go 100 mile an hour with this. And then that kind of goes along with the second point is this co-precipitation of iron oxide and phosphate, is that even some systems have went as far as there's a couple in Lancaster where they've taken precipitated iron hydroxide, Yellow Boy, where they've taken, instead of hauling this waste product from a sediment pond to a landfill, they've built wetlands using iron hydroxide at an agriculture property, like at a CAFO, and taken this product to treat phosphate directly. So there's kind of a few unique ideas we're throwing out there, but it kind of goes a step-by-step process in that step one, is the phosphate truly related to the mine drainage? And then, what is the feasibility? Can we take it from laboratory scale to microcosm scale to full field scale and make these things economically feasible and be 100% efficient in this treatment? So kind of, curious, interested to see, what the future holds with this stuff. But, maybe by next year, we'll have some additional information to share in the next few years. And maybe we'll have some kind of great breakthrough and be co-treating and co-precipitating and using these mine drainage systems to treat agricultural waste, and it'll be a win-win for everybody. So Josh presented the first part. He is the CAP coordinator for not only these three counties, but also for Potter and Bradford and Susquehanna counties. And I am a professor at Mansfield, and I also own Water LLC, and I'm working as a subcontractor on the development of these caps. So if you have any additional questions, here is our contact information, and I will be happy to take any questions you have.
Okay, Jen.
I will only answer questions if they are creative.
Okay.
How many times could I say that in one presentation?
So this has to go pretty quick. We only have maybe enough for maybe one question, Amy, and then I've got to switch over to farewell.
I don't see any questions. There was some communication in the chat.